Looking ahead of 2026, multilateral institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, ABN AMRO project the Philippines to remain among Asia's fastest growing economies. Fiscal discipline remains central, with debt and deficit to GDP ratios projected to decline further. If target headline and food inflation to stay within 2 to 4% to safeguard price stability. For labor market outcomes, we will sustain gains in employment while focusing on the creation of higher quality jobs. We aim to bring poverty incidence down to single-digit level. We will also continue improving innovation and market governance as critical enablers of productivity-driven growth and long-term economic dynamism. We will use our policy instruments to keep prices low and stable, maintain healthy financial markets, consolidate fiscal gains, and enhance spending efficiency. Meanwhile, we will strengthen our investment ecosystem by deepening trade linkages, boosting the competitiveness of our local industries, and equipping our workforce with the skills to thrive in an AI-driven global economy. We will strategically pursue policies and actions that aim to diversify the sources of economic growth and support the flourishing of our regional growth engines. As the President has mentioned in his SONA, we will continue to prioritize measures that have the most significant impact on Filipinos. This includes improving equitable access to quality healthcare, creating education systems that address learning gaps and skills mismatches, and ensuring food security by raising productivity, developing the blue economy, modernizing logistics, and scaling up farm consolidation. With its impact on inclusion and productivity, connectivity remains high on the development agenda. We will sustain high levels of infrastructure development with over 200 flagship projects across various sectors and in different stages of development and implementation. Alongside this, we're implementing the PPP code to mobilize greater private sector participation in our infrastructure build-up with more than 250 PPP projects already underway and about 230 projects in the pipeline. A stronger policy and regulatory environment reinforces our efforts. Over the past 3 years, we have worked closely with Congress to pass reforms that advance human capital, strengthen investment, reinforce fiscal discipline, and create a predictable and enabling framework for growth. We will continue to collaborate with Congress to prioritize transformative reforms identified in the updated PDP. Reforms that will accelerate the realization of our shared development objectives. In closing, while we have made significant progress, the challenges ahead demand bold reforms and sound policy choices. We must continue to build the capacity of our people, transform our institutions, and future-proof our economy. With the 20th Congress as our steadfast partner, we have the opportunity to uplift the lives of our people and shape the future we desire. Together, under Bagong Pilipinas, let us move closer to our shared vision of a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay for every Filipino. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Balisacan of the Department of Economy, Planning and Development. May we now proceed with the presentation of the Department of Finance. May I respectfully recognize the Secretary of the Department of Finance, Honorable Ralph G. Recto.
Thank you very much. Deputy Speaker, Majority Leader, Madam Chair, the Vice Chairpersons, and members of this committee, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. It is nice to be back in the bigger and better house. which was my home for 11 years, which should have been 13 by now, if I had not been sentenced to do hard labor in the cabinet. Be that as it may, thank you for this opportunity to brief the House about the national government's fiscal position. But before we begin to talk about where we are heading, let us first look back at where this administration began. For our fiscal outlook can only be fully understood within the context of the circumstances we inherited and the global trends that heavily influence our course forward. So allow me to provide these briefly. To start with, this administration came at a time when we needed to rescue an economy flatlined by the pandemic. Bumagsak ang ating ekonomiya ng 9.5%, pinakamababa mula World War II, and the past administration left us with a massive debt of 12.8 trillion. Ang interest sa 12.8 trillion ay kulang-kulang mga 650 billion pesos. And against this backdrop, we navigate an ocean of global uncertainties. Nariyan ang Russia-Ukraine war, El Nino, Israel-Gaza war, Israel-Iran war, geopolitical tensions with China, a Cold War, and now the rise of trade wars. Around the time we crafted the first medium-term fiscal framework in 2022, the world still hoped for a smooth post-pandemic recovery. But these geopolitical tensions interrupted this recovery. Supply chains were disrupted, food and fuel prices surged, inflation soared. In response, central banks tightened interest rates, tempering global growth expectations. Just like every other country, we feel the weight of these global pressures. That is why when I took on the Finance Secretary hat, my first move was to recalibrate our growth and fiscal targets. We now review these targets regularly to keep them attainable, realistic, and adaptive to global headwinds, while staying firmly anchored on sustainable growth. Because fiscal goals rise and fall with growth targets. Setting them unrealistically high in uncertain times risk revenue shortfalls. This would widen the deficit and force us to borrow more. To be clear, tempering these targets is not lowering our ambition. It is sound fiscal discipline. It shows confidence in our ability to deliver and the wisdom to pace ourselves so we can finish strong. Our refined medium-term fiscal program now charts a realistic path to reduce our deficit and debt while creating more jobs, raising incomes, and lifting millions of Filipinos out of poverty along the way. And under this, we have ensured that every peso collected or borrowed will be stretched to deliver the biggest bang per buck for the Filipino people. To put it into perspective, the 2025 national budget stands at 6.35 trillion pesos, of which only 4.64 trillion pesos are supportable by revenues. Ibig sabihin, ang gastusin ng gobyerno ay aabot sa 17.4 billion piso kada araw, but only 12.72 billion pesos per day will be financed by revenue collections, Monday to Sunday, every 24 hours, kada 24 na oras. So against this Herculean task of funding a gargantuan budget, we needed to scout for more resources without inflicting new taxes or bequeathing debts to be paid by future generations. And that is why the DOF hiked GOCC's dividend rates to 75% from 50%, which is now one of our major sources of non-tax revenues. And that is why we are privatizing more underutilized government assets. The BIR and BOC have also stepped up with higher collection performances through digitalization, strict enforcement, and plugging of leakages in the tax system, especially from e-commerce. So far, we are on track to meet our medium-term fiscal framework targets, with revenue collections growing by double-digit for the last 3 years at an average of 13.8% annually. Tax collections have also consistently expanded at an average of 11.5% annually. In fact, in 2024, we achieved a revenue effort of 16.7%, the highest in the last 27 years. We are also on course to meet our fiscal program for the year, having already achieved half of our targets. As of mid-year, our tax collection continued to post double-digit growth, totaling 2.03 trillion pesos. This is 10.7% higher than last year. This robust revenue performance placed us among Asia's top revenue to GDP ratios at 16.7% for the first half of 2025. Our expenditures also grew by 9.5% in the first half of the year, reaching 3.03 trillion pesos. Meanwhile, our fiscal deficit for the first half stood at 765.5 billion pesos, within our mid-year target. As a percentage of GDP, our deficit remains manageable at 5.7% for the semester. Our full-year target is 5.5%. With tax collections projected to grow by an average of 10.2% annually from 2025 to 2028, total revenues are on track to hit nearly 6 trillion pesos by the end of the President's term. By 2030, our total revenues will hit 7 trillion pesos. This means that we are asking the BIR and BOC to work harder and boost efficiency at a faster pace. Our projections also took into account the additional revenues from recently enacted reforms, including the VAT on digital services and the Capital Markets Efficiency Promotion Act. Moreover, we expect more revenues from the soon-to-be enacted rationalization of the Mining Fiscal Regime Act. The DOF is also exploring the possibility of having a general tax amnesty this year. Disbursements, on the other hand, are expected to grow by an average of 6% and remain above 20% of GDP. With higher government revenue collections and improved expenditure management, our fiscal deficit is projected to drop from the pandemic high of 8.6% in 2021 to 5.5% in 2025 and down to about 4% by 2028. It will further drop to around 3% by 2030. And crucial to this is ensuring that we prevent wasteful expenditures. That is why we fully support the President's directive to closely scrutinize the national budget. We prepared the National Expenditure Program with the President to ensure that the projects to be funded in 2026 have the highest multiplier effect. For instance, we are allocating 5 to 6% of GDP for infrastructure spending, 4% of GDP to education, and roughly 4% of GDP to health, agriculture, and social welfare to uplift the lives of Filipinos. In the DOF, we always champion two crucial principles. Una, ikalkula na mabuti ang revenue target kasi ang expenditures ay hindi naman open bar sa isang restaurant tapos ang bill ibibigay sa tax collecting agencies. Pangalawa, spend taxes well because if we demand a receipt for goods sold, the people are also entitled to the resibo of government projects financed by the taxes they paid. For good spending is the best way to encourage tax compliance. People are naturally resistant to taxes, but their tax obedience can be won if they will see how the taxes they paid are spent for the right things at the right price, by the right agency, at the right time. And that is exactly what this administration is doing, putting every peso where it matters most: education, health, agriculture, and infrastructure, and digital connectivity. These investments will create more jobs, raise incomes, and pull more Filipinos out of poverty. We also continue to manage our debt according to the highest standards of fiscal discipline, for we are very vigilant not to max out the Philippine National Credit Card. What people need to understand is that when the Marcos Jr. administration took over in 2022, minanapon namin ang 12.8 trillion pesos na utang ng mga nakaraang administrasyon. And we are still repaying these large debts incurred during the pandemic while continuously investing in our people. And even with this, we are making improvements on our debt matrix. If you compare it with our neighbors, our debt is relatively lower than that of most countries in Asia. Japan's total debt